Well, thank you for that very warm welcome. It's as somebody who went to high school in Columbus, Georgia, right next to Alabama, and then taught at West Georgia College, right next to Alabama. I kind of feel relatively at home here. In fact, this morning when I had grits, I thought it was a very normal thing to do. Although I have to confess, I was down along the coast, so I had grits and shrimp, which is not exactly the Atlanta version, but. I'm delighted to be here. Clifton and I are both thrilled by the very warm reception we've gotten everywhere. And I want to take a couple of minutes of your time, if you don't mind. Most of you know I almost never use written stuff, and I don't own a teleprompter, so I have to do a lot of stuff just off the cuff. But the President's press secretary today basically attacked me. Because as many of you know, I've been talking about the need for an American energy policy and the idea that we should develop our capacity for oil to a point where no American president would ever again bow to a Saudi king. And I have suggested that if we developed our energy capacity to the degree we could, that would bring down the price of gasoline on the theory that supply and demand works. This is not something Obama is very used to. This is not a bureaucratic trickle-down, shovel-ready, Solyndra investment, let's go bankrupt together policy. And the President has made three speeches at a press conference recently on energy, which I'll come back to in a minute. But today, I'm taking particular note that Jay Carney said the following, talking about the President. What he is not willing to do is look the American people in the eye and claim that there is a strategy by which he can guarantee the price of gas will be $2.50 at the pump. He went on to say the following. Any politician who does that is lying, because that strategy does not exist. It is a simple fact that there is no such plan that can guarantee the price of oil or the price at the pump, close quote. That's been interpreted by the news media, since I am the only person talking about $2.50, as probably being an attack on me. So I want to take this moment to respond to the President and to his press secretary and say, first of all, Mr. President, I would be happy to debate you anywhere in the country, anytime, on energy. I believe your energy speeches have been so patently incoherent that they are indefensible. I'd be glad to meet you at an oil rig somewhere. I'd be glad to meet you at a refinery. I'd be glad to meet you at a gas station. I'd even be willing to go to a university campus where you'll feel comfortable. But and I would be happy in advance to agree that you can use a teleprompter. But by pure luck, there was a column over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal entitled "Newt is Right on Gasoline," and that column actually outlined the case pretty well. But this morning, Stephen Moore had something in the Wall Street Journal that is so astounding that I want to beg your indulgence. I know this is not a standard political speech, but I've never been a standard politician anyway. This is what Stephen Moore wrote. In 1995, the U.S. Geological Survey estimated 150 million technically recoverable barrels of oil from the Bakken Shale. That's North Dakota. In April of 2008, that number was up to about 4 billion barrels. And in 2010, geologists at Continental Resources, the major drilling operation in North Dakota, put it at 8 billion. This week, given the discovery of a lower shelf of oil, they announced 24 billion barrels of oil are in North Dakota. Current technology allows for the extraction of only about 6% of the oil trapped 1 to 2 miles beneath the Earth's surface, so as the technology advances, recoverable oil could eventually exceed 500 billion barrels. This is North Dakota. There are bigger plays under development now at Eagle Ford Shale in South Texas and at Wolfcamp Shale in West Texas. To give you examples, the Monterey Formation in California may contain 80 billion barrels. So let me start with something that Washington doesn't want to deal with, and particularly liberals don't want to deal with. The idea of peak energy is a stupid idea. It does not exist. It is a technologically limited model. It has been the basis of American energy policy for 40 years, and it is wrong. Now, the President will never learn this for a variety of reasons. One's ideological, and the other's his choice. He appointed as the Secretary of Anti-Energy Dr. Chu. And Dr. Chu had said before he was appointed, he's an academic physicist, a research scientist. His commitment was that the United States, Americans, should pay the same price of gasoline as Europeans. That's $9 or $10 a gallon. Dr. Chu was asked last week what he thought the right price, was he willing to try to lower the price of gasoline, and he said no. He is not in the business of lowering the price of gasoline. He is in the business of developing replacements for gasoline. He then explained about some breakthrough in battery research, which I suspect in 15 to 20 years' time will be useful. But most of us don't have 15 to 20 years to fill up our cars. Now, I believe, so first of all, I believe the lesson of where we are is that we should abolish the Department of Energy as a grotesque failure. So, I simply want to start with the premise, no more cylinders, no more boondoggles. Now let's talk about energy. The President said there are no silver bullets. He's right, but there is a presidential pen. He could sign 3 documents and change the oil trajectory of the United States. First, he could approve the Keystone XL pipeline. That is 700,000 barrels a day of Canadian oil coming to Houston, and it opens up and improves delivery of North Dakota oil, delivery of Kansas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and East Texas oil, so it lowers the price of all of them. In Oklahoma, they told me it's probably worth $6 to $8 a barrel by lowering the cost. Second, he could approve the reopening of areas off Texas and Louisiana and the Gulf. That's 400,000 barrels a day. Third, he could approve designated areas in Alaska for about 1,200,000 barrels. Now that means in those 3 steps, we've added 2,300,000 barrels a day, over 800 million barrels a year to the U.S. oil supply, and we've kept that amount of money at home to create jobs here rather than sending it to Saudi Arabia. Now, the President in his speeches has emphasized that drilling is not the answer, and the President offered an answer. Does anyone here know what the answer was? All right, how many of you knew that the President's answer was algae? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, I believe in science and technology. I believe in biofuels. I think the research is terrific, and I think someplace down the road, eventually, algae will probably be helpful. I do not think this summer we will be putting algae in your cars. I think I am the one candidate who can win this race because I'm the one candidate who understands how to design a very big choice campaign. I worked with Reagan in 80 and 84 on it. We designed it for George H.W. Bush in 88 when he was down 19 points. He won by 6. One out of every 4 Americans switched their position between May and November. The 1994 campaign was a big choice. The 1996 campaign, even while a moderate was losing the presidency, we were getting reelected to the House for the first time since 1928. So let's take an obvious big choice. I want to run this fall on the following energy policy. You can elect President Algae and have $10 a barrel. You can elect President Drilling and have $2.50 a barrel. You decide which future is better for your family. Now, this is why I want to debate Obama this fall. If I become your nominee, I will challenge him to 7 Lincoln Douglas-style 3-hour debates with a timekeeper but no moderator. I think the difference is so wide. He believes in the writing of Saul Alinsky. I believe in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. He believes in apologizing to those who are killing our young men and women. I will never apologize to those who are killing them. We need a candidate who is capable, first of all, of running a campaign that eliminates Obama's billion-dollar ad campaign by proving to people, for example, in gasoline, you can't buy enough ads to convince the American people that they're not paying too much. And that's the kind of campaign you have to run. I watched Ronald Reagan. I worked in the Reagan campaign in '80. I understand how you pick the right fights at the right level and how you make the choice vivid. But then you also need somebody who can work with the Congress to get something done. We are not just in the business of defeating Obama. We are in the business of replacing the bureaucracies, replacing the laws, correcting the judges, and getting back to a country that's on the right track. That requires far more than just having good consultants, negative advertising, and an ability to read somebody's notes. That requires understanding the Constitution, understanding how to take 435 House members and 100 senators, and how to work with the American people. Because in order to change Washington, you have to be active as citizens. We can impose change in Washington, but Washington will never voluntarily change itself. So if I become the nominee with your help tomorrow, if I end up as the nominee, I will ask every candidate running on a ticket with me to pledge that they will stay in office on January 3rd, and before I am sworn in on January 20th, they will repeal Obamacare. They will repeal the Dodd-Frank bill. They will repeal Sarbanes-Oxley. And on the very first day of the new administration, I will sign all three of those repeals to clear the slate and focus on getting positive things done to create jobs in America. And on the first day, about 2 hours after the inaugural address, I will sign a series of executive orders. The first one will abolish all of the White House czars as of that moment. We will, on that very first day, move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in defense of Israel's right of sovereignty. We will, on that first day, reinstate Ronald Reagan's Mexico City policy, and no taxpayer money will be spent on abortion outside the United States, period. The Obama administration apologizes to radical Islamist religious fanatics while attacking the Catholic Church and right-to-life institutions in the United States. On the very first day, I will issue an executive order repealing every anti-religious act of this administration. And to go back to energy, on the very first day, I will sign the pipeline for Canada, and I'm telling the Canadians every day, don't cut a deal with China. Help is on the way. We want the pipeline in the United States. I can only do all of these things with your help. The primary tomorrow really matters, and your vote really matters. And I hope you will decide that having an experienced leader who's actually helped do these things before and who is capable of taking Obama head on is what we need as a party and, more importantly, what we need as a country. And I look forward very much to the questions.
Mr. Speaker, I had to see if he was done. I couldn't tell. He kept getting so much applause, I couldn't tell if when the end was coming. But we're going into another part of our program, Mr. Speaker. We're going to have some questions from our panelists tonight. Right. We have 3 panelists. I don't think you've had a chance to meet them, so I'll introduce you to them. We've got Mr. Moss here, Daniel Moss, who is a 16-year-old 10th grader up in Coleman, Alabama. Rosemary Alabash is head of the NFIB in Alabama. Michael Smith is a banking software analyst in Birmingham. So, with that being said, Daniel, you have the first question.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honor. President Lincoln's proclamation for a day of national humiliation, fasting, and prayer in 1863 echoes much of what our country is going through today. And I agree with him in his words. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown before, but we have forgotten God. Blessed are the nations whose God is the Lord. Most Americans believe in the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that they are given only by God. Yet we live in a country that has seen more than 50 million abortions since Roe v. Wade became law. How will you, like Lincoln, lead our nation back to God?
Well, it's a very powerful and very important question. First of all, you have to have a president who, in fact, believes that that is part of their responsibility, something which Obama clearly doesn't. You also have to have a president who, like Lincoln, is prepared to pray. I've had a project at one point to have Franklin Delano Roosevelt's D-Day prayer, because when we landed in Normandy, President Roosevelt went on national radio, and for 6.5 minutes, he prayed. He didn't just say, "God bless America," he said, "Would you join me in prayer?" And the country participated with the commander-in-chief praying. And it's a very powerful and very poignant prayer. So part of it, I think, is to recenter the country around this ceiling. Part of it, frankly, is to bring the federal judges back into enforcing the Constitution, not rewriting it. Part of what makes my campaign different is, if you go to newt.org, we have a 54-page document on the Founding Fathers and the judiciary that outlines step by step how to bring the judiciary back into line and eliminate this kind of, I think, lawless imposition of elite values by anti-religious bigots. Part of it is, frankly, to take on the elite media. There's a brand new show out that has the word Christian in its title and is deliberately, viciously anti-Christian. And I would simply suggest to all of you that if you imagine that exact same show with the title Muslim in the title, you would know it's impossible, that nobody in the elites would even think of it. And it just tells you how bad the anti-Christian bigotry has become among our elites. And we need a president who, as a national leader, is prepared to say head on, this kind of behavior is reprehensible, destructive, bigoted, and should not be tolerated in polite society.
Rosemary.
Mr. Speaker, welcome. Many major job creation decisions are made through a competitive bidding process. In recent years, labor unions have been able to sway the outcome of these decisions. Critics have pointed out the flaws in enabling those special interest groups to determine these investments funded by taxpayers. What actions will your administration take to ensure that special interests will not be able to interfere with administrative or legislative decisions?
Well, first of all, I think that we need a whole new generation of appointees. And one of the major proposals we have is to eliminate the 130-year-old civil service laws and replace it with a modern management system. Let me also say that I think we're going to have to take the public employee unions head on. because I think that they've become a very destructive force. There's a reason President Roosevelt, for example, was always opposed to public employees having a union, because he said their ultimate employer was the taxpayer, and that you could not have unions negotiating against the people. And I think there's a great deal to be said about the notion that government unions are dangerous. I also think we have to revisit, if we're truly serious about saving money, we have to revisit provisions like Davis-Bacon, which has a union wage set-aside that artificially raises the cost for every city, every county, every school board, every state. That if they build something with federal funding, they spend extra in order to meet a union wage which may not even exist in the area where they're building it. So I think there are a number of steps like this that we need to take.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Michael.
Speaker Gingrich, thank you for coming to the great state of Alabama. As the son of a Marine, husband to a beautiful wife, and someday the father of our children, the national security of our country is an issue that is dear to me. The world in which we currently live in, that our children will inherit, appears to be falling into further chaos. With Iran on the verge of becoming a nuclear power, this administration's poor support of Israel, plus the ongoing struggles to stabilize Iraq and Afghanistan, what actions will you specifically take to ensure that our tomorrow is greater and more secure than our today?
Well, that's a very powerful, very important question. My dad spent 27 years in the infantry, and so I come out of a background of being very aware of and concerned about national security. And this is a place where, as I said earlier, the differences are pretty wide. Obama clearly believes in appeasement, apologies, and weakness as a national strategy. I believe in strength, honesty, and firmness as a national strategy. You couldn't be further apart. And I want to give just 3 examples in this administration. The first is intellectual incoherence. When we picked up, the FBI arrested 2 weeks ago a Moroccan man who was trying to bomb the U.S. Capitol. Under the Obama administration's rules, the FBI could not write down what motivated him because it would be politically incorrect. And so they deal with terrorism as though it was a psychotic behavior when in fact it's a fanatic behavior. Fundamental difference. They deal with it as though it's isolated when in fact it's part of a network of behaviors. And this is an enormous problem in trying to deal with these things. When we had an Army major at Fort Hood yell, Allahu Akbar, and kill 13 Americans in Moon 33, and he had in his wallet a card that said, Soldier of Allah, and he was in regular contact with a cleric in Yemen who was urging the killing of Americans. The Army, I think, to its institutional shame, refused in its report on the incident to deal with the religious motivations which were clearly at the heart of what he's doing. So I just start with that notion that we have to develop intellectual honesty about what threatens us. Second, the President's proposal to dramatically cut the defense budget is suicidal. It is absolutely suicidal. And let me say in passing that when Leon Panetta testified in the Senate that he believed that a NATO agreement or a United Nations agreement superseded the Congress, he should resign as Secretary of Defense. He has forgotten. He is not the United Nations Secretary of Defense. He is the United States Secretary of Defense. And we have yielded none of our constitutional authority from the Congress to the United Nations or to NATO to authorize use of force without the Congress approving. He is exactly 100% fundamentally wrong, and all of us should be alarmed at the idea that the Congress we elect no longer matters, and a group of foreigners over whom we have no impact are now the people who decide when to put young Americans at risk for their lives. It's a fundamental mistake by Panetta. Lastly, in terms of Iran, we should have a short-term and a long-term strategy. Our long-term strategy should be based on President Ronald Reagan, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and Pope John Paul II, and it should be to undermine and replace the government using every non-military means possible. We defeated the Soviet Empire without a general war because we brought to bear economic, psychological, political, diplomatic strategies, and we broke their capacity to resist. We can defeat the dictatorship in Iran decisively if we have a real strategy to do so. In the short run, we should say to the Iranians, we are serving notice that no Israeli prime minister will run the risk of a second Holocaust. No Israeli prime minister would allow an overt enemy to have nuclear weapons. And therefore, if you persist in what you're doing and the Israelis decide they can't take the risk, they will bomb you. When they bomb you, we will understand why they would do that, and we're telling you in advance, you should quit doing this if you don't want to get bombed. But if you do get bombed, it's your fault because you're being provocative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That completes the questions from our panel, but I would like to take a point of personal privilege and ask you a question.
All right.
That great conservative icon, William F. Buckley, Jr., once said that we should go to the polls and vote for the most conservative Republican who can win in the election. Can you tell Alabamians why you are that person?
Sure.
Okay, next question.
Look, I don't want to be, I didn't come here to speak ill of anybody, but there are fundamental differences. And if you look at Governor Romney's ratings when he left Massachusetts, if you look at the size of Senator Santorum's defeat in Pennsylvania, and then look at what I've done. Look at who I've worked with. I helped found and create the Georgia Republican Party. I worked in the Georgia GOP when there was no Georgia GOP. I ran for Congress when, in the middle of Watergate, I ran for 5 years to win a congressional seat. I turned around and took 16 years to create a national majority. I helped design in 1980 the first Capitol Steps event in history. We won 6 U.S. Senate seats by a combined margin of 75,000 votes that year and won the Senate when nobody thought we could. In 1984, I helped design a campaign that set a record, carried 49 states, picked up 33 House seats. In 1988, literally, we were behind Dukakis 19 points in May. And we designed a Reagan-style campaign. We didn't try to go to the middle. If George H.W. Bush had run as a moderate in 1988, he'd have gotten beaten. The fact is, he ran over here as a Reagan conservative, promising no new taxes and standing for national defense and attacking the kind of Massachusetts liberalism that Dukakis represented. And we literally switched 25% of the country. 1 out of every 4 Americans during that campaign switched their view. Now, in 1994, when nobody thought it was possible, we designed a contract campaign in which we went to the American people on a positive basis, just as I would this fall. I would offer paychecks rather than food stamps. I would offer the Constitution instead of Saul Alinsky. I would offer $2.50 a gallon gasoline with drilling rather than $10 with algae. People want real choices, okay? Now, Callista and I can both tell you, this has been a hard race. When we jumped in, in June and July, all the elite media said we were dead. It's pretty difficult to raise money when you're dead. We came back, and by December, we were the front runner. And then we got $5 million of negative advertising in Iowa. We came back from that, and we won South Carolina. And then we got $20 million of negative advertising in Florida. We've come back from that. We carried 156 out of 159 counties in Georgia because they knew me well enough that they repudiated the negative advertising. Now, with your help, we stayed in the race for 2 reasons. I do not believe the other 2 candidates can beat Obama, and I believe this race is the most important in our lifetime, and I will not leave the field. Second, when we win, we can't just beat Obama. We have to win in a principled way on a big enough agenda with enough momentum that we can actually change Washington decisively, or we are not going to get this country back on the right track. I think I'm the only candidate who can do that. Thank you all very, very much.
Behind the curtain.